And his name's Maggot. I mean, it's like, it sounds like...
Right.
How are you, Patrick?
Good. How about you, Clifford?
Doing well.
Nice. What's new? Really quick.
I'm getting done with this trellis I've been working on in the backyard. More hard work in the sun, but feeling good, feeling accomplished.
Yeah, let's just start with the chapter. I don't think nobody really wants to hear that, but we can't just start cold. We have to greet each other, So.
Of course. Okay, Chapter 4, Book 1 of Lord of the Rings. Shortcut to mushrooms.
Fellowship of the Ring. Let's mention that too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Shortcut to mushrooms. All right. So for this chapter, kind of a straightforward chapter. Pretty short, relatively short too, I think.
Yeah.
But there's stuff to talk about here. So we'll talk about Frodo and Sam's breakfast conversation. We'll talk about the route choice that they took. We'll talk about Farmer Maggot's farm.
Mm-hmm.
And then I got some draft notes, and then we have to talk about the interesting topic of distributism and GK Chesterton.
Okay,
So,
I'm excited.
Oh yeah, it should be good. But before all that, Cliff's notes.
Okay, so the hobbits wake up after their dreamlike elven feast to find themselves alone but with fine elvish food and drink for breakfast. Frodo is a bit moody, the thoughts of his conversation with Gildor still heavy on his mind. They set off at once. Though Pippin urges them to go by road, Frodo insists they beeline across rough country for the Buckleberry Ferry, which Frodo wants to hit by nightfall. The going is rough, and almost immediately they descend a steep ridge into a dense thicket. At the bottom, Sam spots a horse and rider in black, silhouetted against the sky, looking down towards them. They end up lost, and the going is slower than they anticipated, and later in the day they hear an otherworldly shriek ring out, and another in answer. As they try to right their course, they come across the farm of old Farmer Maggot, who Pippin knows well. He gives them food and drink, and warns of a strange rider looking for them. He gives them a ride to the ferry in the dark. At the ferry, the group hears hoofbeats, and everyone prepares for another encounter with a black rider. It turns out to be Merry Brandybook, and all ends well for the moment.
Well, I don't even know if it really ended. It was more so Mary just showed up,
Yeah,
and then,
yeah.
And then
well, we assume that they're at the ferry, and
right. Okay.
they've made it through this leg. Okay.
Yeah, we'll have to find out. So.
Okay. I'll sit on that one.
All right. Initial thoughts.
Yeah, like you said, kind of a straightforward blow by blow of a chapter. Once again, it seems like things have intensified pretty quickly. If you remember from 2 chapters ago, technically, this is his leisurely walk to his new house. Although Frodo doesn't really think it, and he lets Sam in on it, he's supposedly just moving right now and taking his time to get from A to B. So certainly this has gotten hotter and heavier than just a ride down the street, basically.
Right. Yep. It has. But I mean, it's like, well, yeah, classic steps in the story.
Mm-hmm.
At some point, I don't know, maybe since you're listening to us, these chapters are just super fun and a breeze. But for a lot of people, I think the first half of the first book just drags out too much.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say somewhere in there's like 1 chapter too many, in my opinion. Now, other people would probably say 2 or 3 too many chapters, and this is probably one of them. But
fair.
But I think it's like, I just think it's all like, this is perfect, like slow build up. It's not fast by any means, but I think it's just like the perfect amount myself.
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah, it's intensifying, but it's not going overboard. But all right, let's just start though.
Okay.
so, so the first thing that happened, like you were saying, Frodo's reflecting on his talk with Gilder, and so the main takeaway that he's having is they're at breakfast, and Pippin's basically asking him about all these Black Riders, and Frodo's getting annoyed with Pippin, and so Pippin goes and gets water, or cleans something, or whatever. And so Frodo and Sam are sitting there thinking, and Frodo's reflecting on Gilder's words like, well, if Gandalf's not going to be here, you should take friends with you, right?
Right.
And so he's looking at Sam and Pippin, and he's just thinking to himself, I can't do that to them. It's one thing messing around here in the Shire, but I can't take them out into like into the wilderness like this. That's just too much.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But Sam notices him thinking, and so Frodo sees that Sam notices him. And so Frodo says, all right, puts it to him again, like, Sam, all right, I'm leaving. And what's Sam's answer to that?
Basically, I'm sticking with you. I can't remember what his exact wording is, but he says, don't even think about it, Mr. Frodo. Of course I'm going with you.
Right.
Back home, my family was like, you're not going to leave Mr. Frodo, are you? And he said, no, of course I'm not. I'm going to stick with him to the end.
Well, it wasn't his family; it was the elves from the night before.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, pardon me.
It was like the "Don't you leave him" lines.
Right. Go ahead.
I'm going with him if he climbs to the moon, and if those Black Riders try to stop him, they'll have Sam Gamgee to reckon with. I don't know. That's a little corny, but
it's corny, but it's classic Sam. Like he's not even blinking, not even thinking twice to throw himself into this. Obviously, he doesn't totally know what he's getting into, but he's just totally game.
All right, so that was the first of kind of three little chunks of answers that Sam gives here that, I don't know, it's kind of like our first, I would say, real insights into his character a bit. Besides that, he was just naturally loyal to anybody living in Bag End. But his next one, Frodo was asking him about the elves because that's what Sam was excited to go on the journey for, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so... you want to read Sam's answer there?
They seem a bit above my likes and dislikes, so to speak. It don't seem to matter what I think about them. They're quite different from what I expected. So old and young, and so gay and sad, as it were.
So Frodo, it was notable, Frodo was startled by the brilliant answer, because that wasn't very Sam-like to, from
that's
what we can tell.
That's a very sort of wise, selfless type of answer.
Really well thought out.
Exactly. He's kind of saying like it was a window into something far beyond myself. He, the observer, doesn't have much of a role in the types of qualities that he was witnessing in the elves.
Yeah. Well, then it goes on. Frodo goes on though, and he says, "Well, I mean, your biggest in for this adventure was to see the elves. You've seen them now. So do you still feel like you need to leave the Shire with me?" I mean, Sam's already stated that he's going to be loyal, but then what's Sam's answer to this?
Yes, sir. I don't know how to say it, but after last night I feel different. I seem to see ahead in a kind of way. I know we're going to take a very long road, into darkness, but I know I can't turn back. It isn't to see elves now, nor dragons, nor mountains, that I want. I don't really know what I want, but I have something to do before the end, and it lies ahead, not in the Shire. I must see it through, sir, if you understand me.
And Frodo even at this, he thought the last answer was profound, but this one, Frodo kind of almost doesn't even understand that response. Whereas I think that was extremely noble, of course.
Yeah, it's peculiar because Sam is actually tapping on some of Frodo's mindset, even if Frodo's not totally acknowledging it. Like this sort of basically committing yourself to something that you don't yet know what it's going to involve. Sam's ready to jump into the abyss, which is a decision that Frodo had already made about himself.
Yeah, but Sam's not doing it at all Frodo's not doing it for himself either, but Sam's doing this also well beyond for himself.
I misphrased that. I mean, Frodo he made that personal decision that he would take that leap. You know what I mean? Not for personal ends or anything.
Right, yeah, but I think, and then I guess, I don't know, this is almost Sam's time of accepting that challenge too, I'd say.
Mm-hmm.
Which is, this is what makes a good story, is lines like that.
It bides well for Sam being a trusty companion.
Besides that, what else do we think about Sam? Because there's not a terrible amount of class difference between the hobbits, but they're clearly like the lower end class.
Yeah.
And from what we can kind of tell, Sam doesn't seem like he's got the highest IQ
Yeah.
of
He speaks
anybody.
he speaks with bad English. Frodo is much more. Clearly Frodo's the wealthiest of the bunch. I think Frodo's also the oldest, and so we get the impression that Sam is like as close a thing as a like domestic servant to Frodo as
Yeah,
we would see.
and there was even stuff like in the early chapters when the hobbits were having like their gossip conversations at the bar.
Hmm.
Gaffer Gamgee was kind of saying, almost referring to the Bagginses as their betters and everything.
Right.
Like, does he literally think that they're superior people to them? I mean, I don't know. Like,
Well, I
in
mean,
what way or
it's
what?
something you don't see. I don't know if you see it in the U.S. as much, but in a lot of parts of the world, there's like kind of an informal social structure around like big men, sort of like patrons. You like
Yeah.
in Spanish, the word patron like literally means patron, but it's kind of like a non-specific patriarch who's like a wealthy family who is directly or indirectly supporting some other fragment of a community through like whether they're domestic servants or like the people that they go to all the time. Like you have other families that are almost like economically subsidiary of the wealthier family, and that's kind of what it seems like is going on here.
Yeah.
So the gaffer is like, Sam, Frodo's your ticket to doing good things in this world, so stay on your toes, basically.
Interesting. I don't know. I might believe that, but I hadn't thought about it. It was that extreme, But you
Not
might be
extreme
right.
by any
Yeah.
means, but I think it's just like this informal. If you know what's best for you, kid. I don't know.
Yeah. Anyways, lower class people. We'll kind of get more into Sam's character as we develop through the book because I don't want to just
Hmm.
throw it all out there at once what he's based on. So he grew up in either small villages on the outskirts of Birmingham or in industrial Birmingham itself. So he had lots of hardworking, probably lower class people that he could have modeled the Gamgees off of, basically, which is
Hmm.
important to note as we go throughout this book. And then the last thing we'll just hit is the origin of the name Gamgee. He said he said he got it from something called Gamgee tissue, which is invented by some doctor named Gamgee or something. But Gamgee
Interesting.
tissue, it sounded like it was like gauze in World War One, and so
Oh,
he just
interesting.
picked out the name from there.
Hmm.
Fun fact, But
Yeah, very.
I
I
mean,
was gonna,
we like names in this show, so we might as well
Mhm.
go over them all.
Of course. As a closing note on Sam, I was going to say he strikes me as being set up right now as perfect companion for Frodo. Doesn't complain, in it to the end, very respectful, somewhat subservient, and uh, pretty useful so far.
You see that too in lots of mythologies.
Hmm.
The first one that comes to mind in the Iliad, Achilles has Patroclus as his
Hmm.
basically sidekick,
Hmm.
Even though I think he was like his cousin or
Right.
something. Like that's common throughout.
Yeah,
Aeneas has somebody in the Aeneid as well.
mhm. I don't want to oversimplify, and this is something we can maybe question or critique as we get further into the story. But I'll hypothesize now that it'll be like the number two guy, super reliable, like his value and abilities and commitment are never really in question for the sake of the story. Whereas the number one guy is the one having like the personal struggles, like man versus self, conflict with the world, and like doubts and challenges.
Hmm.
But we can interrogate that and break that down if we need to later on. But
Yeah.
that's an idea I'll put out there.
Interesting. Yeah, we'll come back to that. Let's talk about the route that they were going to take here.
Hmm.
So, the plan is to beeline. You said beeline in your Cliff Notes. Why does it? What's the deal with beeline? There's nothing. They don't go straight. They don't make a B. They go straight. Why isn't it like eye line?
Be like bzzz, like an insect, flies flies
Yeah?
over the countryside. Yeah. Like if a
Okay.
bee, like, it wants a flower, it can fly direct. It's like this. It's a very similar thing to saying as the crow flies.
Fine.
Things
Okay.
that fly go in straight lines.
Okay, acceptable. All right. Now we know. All right. So the
Point
plan's
being, there's a winding road. They're already off the road a little ways, and Frodo pretty much says, "Let's go straight. We can cut off a bunch of distance by not following that road around. Plus, I don't want to be on the road."
because of the
And
Black Riders.
right, right.
Right. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this part, but just really quick, there was Pippin has the line, "Shortcuts make long delays." I didn't
Hmm.
look it up. Maybe you can say it was laziness, but I didn't look it up. But I think I would guess that's an Old English proverb.
Hmm.
That'll be a topic that we come back to. Like, there's lots of just like Old English proverbs throughout this thing that he is weaving in throughout.
Hmm.
But I guess we'll discuss that later. Anyways, Frodo's answer was funny. Pippin, it turns out, really only wanted to take the road because he wanted to go to the Golden Perch, which has the best beer in the East Farthing. And so then Frodo's like, I thought it was the good line, like, well, that settles it. Shortcuts make delays, but inns make longer ones. Good banter going on. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Also setting up an early role of Pippin as being both fairly wise here in recognizing that the cutting across the land will be way slower than Frodo thinks, but also being comic relief.
Yeah, I guess it's wise, but yeah, it's like he just kind of knows the land as opposed to
Yeah.
Sam, who hasn't been more than 10 miles from his house.
Right,
But
right.
Pippin and Frodo seem well traveled around the Shire. Like, they know every corner. But yeah, it sounded like their journey, they said in a straight line it'd be 18 miles. And then it was extremely tough going. Notably, Sam looked behind him and saw a Black Rider at one point, so they definitely committed to cross country in it.
Right.
But I thought it was
And
interesting.
I was trying to picture that in my head, but the impression I got from reading it is that the Black Rider's like way up, like on the side of a
Yeah,
big ridge line,
yeah.
like super small, and can't see
Like
them because
or
they're in the
at like a
forest.
bluff or something, you know?
Right.
Yeah. Whereas they're like
Yeah,
behind,
bluff is a
like
better
stuck in
word.
bushes. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah,
That'd
the
be
way
my
we've
guess.
been talking about it, I think it sounds like they're being directly pursued, like
Oh,
a
yeah.
horse is on their tail, and it's not quite that.
Right. Yeah. It's
Quite
not.
like
It's
that.
not immediate.
But yeah, regardless, that is a lot of distance to cover when you're bushwhacking.
Yeah. I was also interested in they cross they come to like a body of water, and Pippin kind of immediately picks out what it is, and he says, "All right, we got to cross right now and then start veering right, or else we're just going to get way too off course." And so it's like Pippin and Frodo have a pretty good sense of direction. That's impressive.
Yeah.
And I wonder if that's just unrelatable to us because we use GPSs everywhere.
Hmm.
I don't know if it was better for Tolkien. Like I enjoyed kind of trying to picture the geography as he was describing it, but that's pretty hard.
Absolutely.
What'd you think?
They do get lost right after this, so clearly,
They didn't really get lost. They kind of just kind of knew where they were going. I mean, it's like it's uncharted, not quite uncharted, but it's just a clump of whatever. Like they knew where they were at. It's just
right.
they didn't care where they came out at.
Yeah, I basically got the impression that like when they're in forest, they're like they can't tell what their surroundings are, and they can't get their bearings as easily, so they're more likely to get thrown off their straight line. Whereas in the open fields, they could hold a straight line pretty well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which for a lot of people is actually like I'd say even for us, without the experience of doing that, is probably still really hard.
Right.
But I totally agree. I think some of those skills are just like not relatable in our times because we don't know how to get around without technology or like urban landmarks.
Yeah.
Our mental imagery of how we understand our environments is just completely different. But if you imagine for them, like they've had to grow up their entire lives in a place with no, like their only wayfinding is their ability to like read natural signs. Just by default, like your understanding of the land is way, way, way better.
Yeah. All right. Well, enough of that. Let's go on to the main little bit that I wanted to hit here. So I'll just read this out. When they came to make their meal, they stopped for lunch. When they came, yeah, of course.
What do you do when you're being tailed by evil riders on horses?
Well, yeah. Well, that's the thing here. All right. So when they came to make their meal, they found that the elves had filled their bottles with a clear drink, pale golden in color. It had the scent of a honey made of many flowers and was wonderfully refreshing. Very soon they were laughing and snapping their fingers at rain and at black riders. The last few miles they felt would soon be behind them. I just feel this is the most typical Hobbit thing you could ever imagine.
Mm-hmm.
Now, maybe it's the elves like drink has an influence on them, which it probably does.
Yeah, it sounds kind of like mead, like fermented honey,
Yeah, but
which would be like drinking wine.
but this is gonna almost become cliche as we keep going through this. But there's so many times where the hobbits are just they're out in nature and then they're just going along, and then all of their troubles from the previous day, they completely forget them as they sit down
Yeah,
and like have like a leisurely break. But
yeah.
then all of a sudden it's immediately interrupted because there's a horrible shriek that they hear, and then they hear another shriek basically answering back to it, and they kind of know, well, that has to just be the Black Riders that have been tailing us this whole time.
They suspect that that there's words
Right.
buried in that shriek, but
Yeah.
not words that they can understand, and not words that any hobbit would speak.
Right.
Not noises that any hobbit would or could make.
Right. Yeah, I just think that that little sequence in there, because it's not like central in any way, but
Mm-hmm.
obviously it's significant. But that I feel like that little sequence is just typical Tolkien. It's like, all right, we got a novelty detail about something that the elves gave them, you know. So it's like, all right, cool details about that. Then you have some jolly hobbits. They sang a little song, and then and then all of a sudden there's a creepy. Probably at this point it was kind of novel, whereas now it's not like anything special. Just hearing a shriek like that in fantasy,
Right.
but it's like at the time it's like, oh, very creepy event that just brings back like the fear right away and brings you back into the story. I feel like all of that stuff is just we're just gonna see it so much, but I don't know, and I always like it. Yeah.
Does it, like your description, how that's very typically hobbits to forget all their troubles, certainly makes them sound very simple-minded.
It's one of their good qualities, actually.
They're not likely to hold a grudge, and in the same way, they're quick to forget their troubles.
Yeah, or they can enjoy the moment. They're not like
Mm-hmm.
bogged down by the weight of like what they're doing. Like Frodo's not bogged down by it, even him.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Is like I think our one example of this so far, at least, is Frodo being conscious of confronting the task of destroying the ring, and aware that that's like a tremendous responsibility. And even though it's in the back of his head, it's not really weighing on him at this point. And so certainly for the others who have even less weight on them, this sequence of events are a concern to them, but are not like, oh my god, I'm going to die. Oh my god, this is the scariest thing ever.
Yeah. What do we think about just the actual walking around the country itself?
Sounded cool. Sounded really difficult.
Well, it reminded me of like Saving Private Ryan, where they're just
interesting.
walking in between the drop zones.
Mm-hmm.
And then, obviously, it reminded me of Tolkien's childhood himself. I got a quote here. Let me just read it. Because before he was 10 years old, they were living out in the outskirts of Birmingham, and it was on a cottage. And so, like, his summer days were just spent walking around with his brother, like, tramping through people's fields, just like what the hobbits were doing themselves. And so, yeah, that all has... this is directly influencing him here, and this is like how the whole Shire came to be itself. But let me just read this quote. Their new home was a semi-detached brick cottage in the hamlet of Sarehole, a mile or so beyond the southern edge of Birmingham. Traffic in the village was limited to the occasional farm cart or tradesman's wagon, so it was easy to forget the proximity of the industrial city. With memories of South Africa receding into his subconsciousness and the urban buzz of Birmingham fresh in his mind, Tolkien experienced the contrast of English rural life at a time when his embryonic imagination was most receptive. It was in this tiny hamlet and days of childhood innocence that the seeds of the Shire were planted. And that's from one of Joseph Pierce's books.
It's interesting, like
This was like literally at like 1900 itself when this was happening, by the way.
having the reference, like having the contrast for him to reference as a kid is a pretty unique position for a lot of people.
Yeah, and there's other stories out there if you read the biographies on him and stuff, where they're walking through the fields with his brother, and they get scared of the neighboring farmer. Like there's one that they call the white ogre, and I think they call that farmer's son the black ogre or something. And that actually kind of reminded me of Frodo and Farmer Maggot's relationship a little bit. So I guess we could use that as our transition. So yeah, so he came to Farmer Maggot's. I mean, you kind of blew through it in your Cliff's Notes, so we don't terribly have to do too much with this. But he comes to Farmer Maggot's farm, and Frodo's terrified of this guy because he's caught him stealing mushrooms when he was younger.
Right, because Frodo used to live around here.
Right, yeah, because Frodo originally lived in Buckland, which is, I think at this point they had 5 miles left to get to the ferry, and then once you get to the ferry and cross, you're in Buckland. So yeah, he was coming around here at times. Pippin was friendly with them though, so he kind of introduces them and does all the talking, and they sit down for beer with them. Then it was interesting how Sam was suspicious of him and has mistrust for him.
Right.
For hobbits from the other part of Shire. And Maggot also has the same thing about hobbits and hobbits as well.
Which, I mean, is kind of a recurring thing. I feel like whether it's in literature or in culture in general, there's this like typical impression that like people like Pippin and Frodo in this situation are kind of more worldly. Like they're both
worldly for the
better
more Shirely, I guess. You know, like
exactly.
I thought it was interesting that the Shire is somewhat fragmented like that. Like they don't all recognize themselves as one people.
Right. We heard earlier in the introduction that the Shire as a whole, hobbits are suspicious of foreigners, and that everybody's happy-go-lucky in the Shire, sort of. But yeah, obviously within the Shire there's some more distinction. But yeah, Pippin and Frodo are better traveled, basically. So it makes sense that they're a little bit less suspicious of each other. But yeah, go ahead.
Well, all right. So obviously we get to the news with Farmer Maggot that he said a stranger came up asking for Baggins. Surprise, surprise, it's one of the Black Riders again. And it was kind of interesting. The rider's words to him were pretty interesting. He said to Maggot, so this is the rider talking to Farmer Maggot. He said, Baggins has left. So Farmer Maggot had told the rider to go to Hobbiton, but the rider responds, Baggins has left. He is coming. He is not far away. I wish to find him. If he passes, will you tell me? I will come back with gold, which Maggot basically just tells him, like, go away. I don't want anything to do with you. You're not wanted here. Get out. Which, hey, all right, just sorry to do like a slight spoiler here, but if you've read this story before and you know what the Black Riders really are later on, I feel like this is like inconsistent, because if you know what they really are, I feel like they would have just killed Maggot outright here. Like I don't really think
we're warming up a little too slowly at this point.
Yeah, but yeah, I don't know, Maggot. I mean, besides just going through the details of what happened, just to comment on stuff here, Maggot's basically telling Frodo, like, hey, I'm glad you're coming back to Buckland. We're going to protect you. Stay here. That's my advice. You know, we can tell him Bilbo's dead and gone, because he really is, you know? And so it's cool that he's, like, willing to help them all. And then there was the one line there, that big chunk. You want to read that, what Maggot says to Frodo?
It is plain as my nose that no accident brought you and that rider here on the same afternoon. And maybe my news was no great news to you after all. I'm not asking you to tell me anything you have a mind to keep to yourself, but I see you are in some kind of trouble. Perhaps you are thinking it won't be too easy to get to the ferry without being caught.
Right, and so that at this point the sun's sinking low, and so Frodo's saying, like, man, we really got to book it to the ferry, because I don't want to get there. I don't want to have to do this during nightfall, you know? And so he's graciously trying to, like, just bow out and everything, but Maggot's like, well, how about you stay for dinner? And I'll just take you in a wagon down to the ferry. And so obviously they graciously accept that. But just some things to comment on this is the no accident. Anytime we see that, it's like, okay, Maggot might be referring to it's no accident that the rider and Frodo came on this. That's literally what he's referring to. But it's also like, well, it's no accident that Frodo showed up at your house and you're willing to help him like this too, you know? Right. Frodo, in the second chapter, basically was talking to Gandalf, and Gandalf saying, like, hey, I'm going to help you however I can. Now, Gandalf's missing. In the last chapter, the elves came and helped Frodo and all of them, because they shooed the Black Rider away, whether the elves knew it or not. And then now they're relying on Maggot as well. So it's like we're going to keep seeing how many people these hobbits have to rely on, you know? Right. But yeah, Maggot, I don't know, he basically takes him down, and that was like kind of spooky, good good scene. And then they set up the drama, which was a little clever to think like the horse coming out is going to be a black rider and it's going to confront him. But then it just turns out to be Mary. And then,
Right.
yeah. And then what was the parting gift?
Farmer Maggot hands Frodo a basket of mushrooms.
Yeah, which I thought was a clever and endearing ending, you know?
Of course, shows his goodwill,
Yeah.
in spite of being named Farmer Maggot.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you know, and that's why Frodo was scared of him originally, because Frodo was stealing mushrooms from him as a kid, and so now he's kind of just giving them away. You know? But,
yeah, I was thinking this is, even though we got the background of child Frodo stealing mushrooms and getting beaten by Maggot and chased off his land, this is still reads like a classic young boys out in the wild or whatever, carousing, getting caught by the mean old man who's like, what are you kids doing? And then he turns out to be actually helpful. You know, I feel like this is almost like a trope in a bunch
like
of
the Sandlot
stories where, yeah, exactly. Like the guy that's kind of scary is actually a good guy, and his name's Maggot. I mean, it's like it sounds like it was the little kids that made up. He's like, yeah, that's a real bad guy living in that house over there. Farmer Maggot.
Yeah.
But
wow.
It's interesting.
You're right.
It's interesting because it makes Frodo and Sam and Pippin seem like pretty young, like seem almost like children or like teenagers here, you know, even though Frodo's like, he's a full-fledged adult at this point, right? He's 50 years old, which I know is the Hobbit age is a little bit different, but
that's like, I don't know, late 30s probably, maybe early 40s. I don't know. Yeah,
it's kind of struck by like it still felt like the old man dealing with the kids situation.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I would be kind of scarred like that, you know. Like I got like childhood fear still. Like I hate raccoons. But yeah, all right. Well, let's go on here. So, like I was kind of saying at the beginning, people think this. I don't know. So, like the first half of this book is really drags on, and like I said, I think it's even one chapter too long at some point. But debatable which chapter you should cut or parts to cut. But just a couple draft comments from what I remember, because I didn't actually read it this week. Just like I'll be upfront with that. From what I remember about the drafts of this, it was originally very different. So like the equivalents of Sam and Pippin, because they weren't called Sam and Pippin yet, have a beer with Farmer Maggot, and then Frodo/Bingo. Remember his original name's Bingo. He's invisible in the house because Farmer Maggot still hates him to this day. You know, because of that. And so, like, there was something, I think, like, the Black Riders were involved, too, or something. But, like, all I remember is somehow Frodo's wearing the ring, and he pulls a prank on him by, like, drinking out of the cup. Like, he takes the cup of beer and drinks out of it. Which is,
right.
I don't know. It's, like, it's pretty bizarre, and I'll kind of just leave it to the listener to discover, because I didn't take the time to read it this week. But it was a different story. Also noteworthy, this chapter was a lot longer because some of the sections of the prologue were just in here. Like it was supposed to be conversation between Frodo, Sam, and Pippin, like living on like the second floor, living in a house. Like hobbits don't live on like the second floor of a house because they hate being up high, and like they're always on like the ground floor. Like, and there was
so the sort of general introduction to hobbits in the Shire.
Yeah, like
was
but literally
here.
like sections of the prologue, word for word, were in this chapter. And so then he was like, "Oh man, this is too long. Let's just shove this stuff in the prologue because I don't want to not use it." You know. But,
interesting.
But also, if J.R.R. Tolkien had his way, along with his son Christopher Tolkien, who he's kind of sending this to, and I think at this point Christopher Tolkien's in his late teens. I'm gonna guess. I think he's like 16 at this point when he's writing this part. They loved these Hobbit chapters, and if it was up to them, they would not. They could have done this all day. They could have done the whole book in the Shire because they love like the goofy interactions like this.
Right.
But C.S. Lewis, you know, we'll give C.S. Lewis a real intro at some point. But you know, he's Narnia, Chronicles of Narnia writer, Christian apologist at this point too.
Mhm.
best friends with J.R.R. Tolkien because they were Oxford professors together. So he was reading these chapters as they kind of came out. And then there was also Rainer Unwin, who was, if you remember, I think we talked about it, there was an 11-year-old that reviewed The Hobbit. Do you remember that? Talking about that?
Vaguely? Not really, no.
Oh, okay. Well, I think we talked about it at some point. But he had reviewed The Hobbit because he was the son of the publisher. Unwin was like Alan and Unwin are the publishers of Lord of the Rings, the original
Oh,
ones.
interesting.
And so Rayner
Okay.
was like the 11-year-old son at the time of The Hobbit. So when he was working on the sequel, he started just giving stuff to Unwin, who gave it to his son Rayner to like, because he wanted his opinion on it too. And so basically, both C.S. Lewis and Unwin, the kid, were saying like, "Hey, you guys are dragging this out too long. Get them out of the Shire. Hobbits are fun, but they're fun when they're out of their element. Like this is ridiculous in here."
So they were like Tolkien's early readers to bounce ideas off of.
Yeah, they were. Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much Tolkien he liked their input, but I how much it swayed him or whatnot. Because there's 5 chapters. The first 5 chapters are still in the Shire of this book.
Right,
so,
right.
so it's not like he completely took that to heart. Because probably everybody else would probably have only wanted like 3 chapters at most in the Shire.
Okay.
But he especially considered Rainer Unwin's, I would guess, because he wanted like the kid's perspective. Like he really liked that, and he had deep respect for C.S. Lewis. But it's hard to influence Tolkien, which we'll kind of see.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, originally I thought we would be talking about C.S. Lewis this episode, but like I said, I think we'll give him a real, I don't know, maybe like a special episode to dig into Lewis and Tolkien's relationship. But
Because at least I've heard that they were good friends.
yeah,
Right?
they were good friends.
Contemporaries, good friends.
But yeah, but it kind of like their friendship kind of ran its course. So like the last decade of C.S. Lewis's life, they weren't super close. But yeah, I think we'll get into that all at some point.
Okay.
The other thing to talk about, random thing, like this is kind of, we're talking about this at the end because it somewhat connects to the chapter. It's kind of like our last chapter in the Shire proper because Buckland's technically just in addition to the Shire.
Right.
And I don't know where else to talk about this. We could talk about it in the prologue, but I thought that would have been too much. So we're talking about it here. So we're talking about distributism, which is basically it's like the form of government that the Shire has here. And that was kind of Tolkien and other writers they liked, like that was their idea too, or philosophers they liked, that was kind of like the political system that he lined up with. And so I thought it'd be fun to talk about that. This is actually also interesting because this actually won't be a partisan conversation in any way, even if it is political. But yeah, do you want to read that big long chunk by Charles
Coulomb.
you would know. All right, we'll go with that.
Charles Coulomb.
Yeah, okay, read that.
Okay. The concept of society as an organic whole, without class conflict, without a communal structure, is one that has characterized Catholic social thought since the Roman Empire. In many ways, the Shire expresses perfectly the economic and political ideas of the Church, as expressed by Leo XIII in Rerum Novarum and Pius XI, Quadragesimo Anno. Traditional authority, the Thane, limited except in times of crisis. Popular representation, the mayor of Michael Delving, likewise limited. Subsidiarity, and above all, minimal organization and conflict. It is the sort of society envisioned by distributists, Belloc and Chesterton in Britain, by Salazar in Portugal, by the framers of the Irish Constitution, by Dollfuss in Austria, and by Smetona in Lithuania. However far short or close these dwellers in the real world came to their goal, the fact remains that it is something very close to the Shire that they had in mind.
All right, so so that was a description of distributism, which distributism is basically the maximizing the distribution of private property to basically as many individuals as you can. So this was actually it was a critique on both socialism and capitalism at the same time that was developing around the turn of the century here. And so it says no basically to the overarching governments that kind of tell you what to do in socialism. But it also says no to the big businesses who have like all sorts of monopolies and then these factories with the terrible working conditions and they kind of own like their whole labor force. which is the problem of capitalism.
Yeah, and the bad version of both in, I would say, maybe a more communist situation or more intensely socialist situation, the government controls the means of production,
Yeah.
which means theoretically the government basically controls the wealth. Whether that actually happens is up for debate, but in principle, that's what it is. And in capitalism, pretty much the captains of industry control the wealth. Like the wealthiest people control the most capital.
Right. And so that's what they want. They want to oppose both of those. So it's kind of like
Right.
capitalism and socialism are on one like opposite ends, but then
Mm-hmm.
if you make a triangle and they point up in between them, somewhat like related but like not at all in the middle of the line, but like further above, like out of the plane would be distributism. Like it, yeah.
Just reading this for the first time, I would say that like communism sounds closer to me because at least the some of the founding premise of communism is that to take the means of production and the power away from the industrialists and the captains of industry to distribute it to the people, that you would use the government as the way to distribute that, and that theoretically the government is a collection of the proletariat, like a collection of the people. In practice, that like instantly failed, and it was never really a collection of the people.
But it's not. But it's also like the exact opposite of that because I think they literally private ownership is like the key
Right,
word
right.
because they want a bunch of small businesses, extremely small, who
Mm-hmm.
kind of have like the free market to, deal as they
Yeah,
want.
I would say basically it's like
To
a
keep,
fairly libertarian thing,
yeah,
and
libertarians like
just
the
generally
closest.
decentralized political and economic power.
Yeah, because they want to give you your freedom to have your own business and run in whatever direction you want or can. But of course, they don't want you to get too big,
Right.
And then it also emphasizes this kind of works. I don't know if they want this or it only works when there is no real class divides. But like we were seeing with
Mm-hmm.
the Shire or Hobbiton, at least there's the Gamgees on the low end and then Frodo on the high end. But I mean, they can
Mm-hmm.
still basically all live together pretty easily, I'd say.
Right.
But yeah, I think it keeps like a really tight knit, close localness, of where you're really, really connected to
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
everybody. So it's like, yeah, you're in control of your own business. And so that's pro meritocracy, I'd say.
Say that again.
You're in control of your own business. So it's like, if you're successful, great for you, and like you still control your
Right.
destiny. But
Right. Okay. Okay.
but then it's also
Your success is based on your merits.
right, yeah. But then you're also since there's people close to you, it's like if you see somebody in need, you're also aware of that too. Like
Right.
maybe that's not obviously that's one.
There's a strong community structure.
Yeah, I don't know. So what do you just kind of make of that whole system? Like, what do you think of it? Like it, dislike it? I don't know if it's really practical here. That's the other thing to consider. Like if you could do that.
There's aspects of it that I like a lot. I'll there's two things I'm thinking of. One, two books that I've read recently, I should say. One, some people may have heard of. It was a bestseller for a while, Sapiens, which I gave to you to read a little while back. That I think in this situation we kind of make the argument that like across history, like this type of organization is possible at like a certain size of a society, but it's not so much that you have to limit class division for this to function, but more like it's not really possible to organize a really large number of people under a system like this. And as soon as the system gets really, really big, you need bigger and more complex hierarchies, both economically and politically, to run that society, which is like an unfortunate byproduct of the creation of society or an intrinsic factor, depending on how you want to look at it. And if you take it at that angle, then it's like you kind of have like, it's a little bit of an anarchist view because you have to sort of reject the trappings of the large society to even attain something like this. Another thing I was thinking of is a book I'm reading right now called The Unsettlers, that is a guy following a handful of people on various versions of them kind of searching for meaning and community in our sort of modern, alienated, industrialized world, where in various forms they're kind of like returning to the land and trying to return to a more traditional economy in the vein of this distributism, where there is a stronger communal structure, there's a stronger relationship between people and the earth that they're a part of. It's like a very, when you start to get into that stuff, a lot of stuff comes hand in hand, like family structure and community structure and agriculture and like sustainable practices get tied together. Like the pace of life moves slower, that type of thing.
Yeah. Well, my
Anyways,
big wonder with
that's a little rambly, but go ahead.
yeah, my big wonder with this is like, yeah, it functions at a really local level, but then I mean, and I almost wonder like, is it just on like the town level, and that's almost why Sam's suspicious of outsiders, and so is Maggot. You know, like is that
Right.
playing a part in this too? And then can you? It seems like it'd be like a comfortable and fair and good way to live, but I'm not sure it really kind of expands the pie. I don't know if like the standard of living would ever like increase under this system. You
No,
know?
almost certainly not. I mean,
Yeah.
I would say that with the Shire as the model here, that it's a little bit of a, well, I would say the Shire and whatever it's based off of is like a pretty static rural economy. You know, like the GDP of the Shire is not growing each year at 2%. You can imagine it's pretty static. The population, likely as a result, is pretty static. The forces that we are very familiar with in the modern world of like constant growth in wealth, population, what have you, technology, are possibly present in the Shire or like pre-industrial England, but moving at such a slow rate that they're not really visible across someone's lifetime.
Right.
And also on that note, I think the Shire very deliberately is like sort of a utopian construction of Tolkien's that parallels the ideas that these other people have in mind. Personally, I don't actually believe that the Shire could function as the Shire in this situation. You know, I think it's like wishful thinking that it's a real place. Like it's very intentionally fantastical on Tolkien's part. I don't actually think that the Shire could function as it's described in Lord of the Rings or in our world. You know, I think it's intentionally an idealistic construction by Tolkien. Like it's part of his personal fantasy of what he wishes England existed as and looked like. In the same way that I think some of these distributists had a vision of something that they really wanted, but it wasn't necessarily attainable.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. Like, yeah, it's an open question. It seems like for like the past century when I was looking this up, it sounds like a lot of popes have commented on this, and this
Mm-hmm.
is like they would give this thumbs up. But again, can't quite understand how practical it is. But the other big one who's into this is GK Chesterton, who,
Mm-hmm.
well, anyway, so he was the president of one of these leagues. We'll get into who he is in a second. But yeah, just a last word on distributism here. So he said the distributist credo that private property should be enjoyed by as many of the population as possible, so that people could be freed from the wage slavery of big business or state monopoly. Seems like a might be too ideal, like too high an ideal of a system, but still sounds
Mm-hmm.
cool. I like the idea myself.
Yeah, it's also like as a concept, I'd say it's something that's not like a. I wouldn't put it in the same type of definition as capitalism or communism. That's actually describing like how wealth moves around and who owns everything. Like I would say it's a little bit more vague, and so I could easily imagine that Chesterton or some of his contemporaries in a distributist league could be pushing for changes in society that lead to more distributed wealth or something like that without saying like modern England is all screwed up and we need to like throw off the yoke of the British government and return to distributism, that type of thing.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Like it's not necessarily revolution. I'd say it seems like it could fall in more in line with reform instead of revolt.
Right. Yeah. I don't know. I think if we go any further, I'm completely out of my depth. So let's talk about GK Chesterton because we got the opportunity. So
Sure, sure.
we're gonna mention him throughout this series a couple times. I think I got notes from him in certain places. But this guy is pretty famous. He's the generation above Tolkien and Lewis, and he was like this 300-pound man, and he was like extremely jolly all the time, and he's got a bunch of books out there. He was kind of it's like it's hard to even classify him because he's a journalist, and he probably would have considered himself as a journalist first, but then he ends up being kind of a Christian apologetic a little bit. And so like this is the kind of guy that he was very famous at the time and writing all these books, and so Tolkien would have just ate up all his stuff. Like as a kid he was probably reading all his books. And
Okay, so he's like a generation ahead.
yeah, so this is one of the authors that probably influenced Tolkien, dare I say heavily. Definitely influenced him a little bit. But I mean, it like if you read his book, if you read Tolkien and everything, it's like there's certain stuff that influences him, and he just like kind of like puts down his guard and just like lets these people influence him all the time. But then there's other people that's like they don't even scratch the surface. It's like one or the other. Like he's either extremely influenced by you or he's not at all. That might be my reading of it, and that might be biased to how I function too. But I don't know. But anyways, so like I thought we might as well talk about this guy because he's super cool. Like I really like reading this guy too. So like how I would describe this guy. Have you read any of his books?
No, I haven't. Only these quotes you pulled out for me.
Okay. Well, yeah, we might have to do this at some point. All right. He's super super witty, super paradoxical, and very whimsical too, which is like interesting, fun combination. I almost think today people that like his intellectual enemies today would probably think of him as a troll, like what we think of here, except he's just like way smarter and way better at it than any troll is today. Like he's a eloquent, beloved, accomplished troll. Say, and I don't even think I don't know, he was kind of he probably was intentionally doing it or whatever, but he seemed to just be functioning that way more so because I think he just operated in a different, way more entertaining world.
Okay.
Because he was like very absent-minded and everything. But what was also notable about him was he was really good buds with some prominent figures of the day too. So like his most famous is going to be this playwright George Bernard Shaw, who was also famous at the time, and intellectually like they disagreed about every single thing, but GK Chesterton probably like truly loved this guy as a friend, like really cared about him deeply, get along even though they didn't agree on anything whatsoever.
It's cool. Always a good trait.
Yeah. And so now in my personal experience trying to read this guy and understand the guy, very difficult to adjust to, super dense writing. It's a century ago that he was writing most of his books, so I don't know. It's already starting to like kind of age to where it's it's not really readable. Like I wonder how 11-year-old Tolkien could have read some of this stuff, but I guess they just made him smarter then. So I don't know. You got to be really diligent about it because he's gonna have a bunch of quotes. Like you can just type in Chesterton quotes, and there's gonna be literally like 300 really good ones right off the bat, and they're all usually like the most memorable ones. The quote itself, just within like a 2 or 3 sentence thing, is going to be extremely paradoxical, and it's fun. And it's like it's true too. And then his essays, so like each chapter of his book, he kind of just rambles in some of these books where he's just got like a main topic and then he just writes about like subtopics on it for a chapter, and it's just like one long essay, and then it's like the books are kind of like a collection of essays, I'd say, in most cases. And though he has like fiction writing too, but this is more so just in his, I don't even know how, I mean, it's definitely nonfiction, but I don't know how you technically, what it is, like cultural commentary or anything. I don't know.
Yeah, essays. That type of thing.
But when you read the essays, you got to really pay attention because there's always just like a twist in there. And it's some, like lots of these, like the best ones, it's just like they make you go like, oh, whoa, not like the cycling, like when somebody's about to crash and you go, but it like, whoa, like it like takes your breath away, Yeah.
That's an interesting feeling.
I know it is. And like, well, that's the deal, because it's like for a journalist / amateur theologian almost writing kind of just like cultural commentaries on like that's what his essays are about. It's just like something that he's viewing in like the culture at that point. Like it's unbelievable how like kind of lyrical and intellectually poetic he can be, and he's still joyful at the same time, and he's optimistic, and all at the same time he's coming across and he's proving his point, which is usually counterintuitive or countercultural at this point in 1900, I'd say.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, he's arguing with you, but it barely feels like an actual argument.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. At least for me, it can not really pierce, but like kind of seep straight to like my heart almost, I'd say. And I feel satisfied, very satisfied. Because I feel like what I'm reading is, in my opinion, is true with a capital T, is what I would say.
Okay, interesting.
But anyways, he, just to get into himself more, he was actually a convert to Christianity too. So he was kind of, I don't know, less than nominally Christian when he was growing up, and then he slowly becomes like a pretty real but kind of, I guess, like mere Christian, I guess is what C.S. Lewis would say, you know. And then eventually he actually becomes Catholic too. So again, like, this is another thing that Tolkien can grasp too, because it's like two Englishmen that are Catholic. It's like, that's a rare thing to find, you know, in 1900. Maybe you don't know, but like that's the deal there. And yeah, Joseph Pierce in his books were basically saying these two are like kindred spirits, because they both want an idealized English countryside where the people could work and own the land themselves. And yeah, they would have hated like Birmingham too. They would have called that a hellhole, which is what Tolkien called it, especially because Birmingham in his lifetime expands and the countryside they used to live in gets swallowed up and destroyed. So I mean, he would relate to Chesterton in that way. There will be more influences throughout this book that I think we'll stop to talk about, but we can't really keep going. But I mean, just as we've already seen with the distributism stuff, it's like, this is probably where Tolkien would have heard it from, as far as I can tell.
Okay.
And then both their work too, there's the common thread in it too, that they're both, there's a good sense of wonder, and it's kind of jolly in their writings and enchanting, I would say. Which, as I just said, it's impressive that Chesterton can do that with extremely non-fiction topics, you know, like extremely non-fiction topics. But then, yeah, and then in Tolkien, I mean, we're getting it as we read, and I think we've tried to point out where the examples are. Like, what I can name so far is the whole party scene in the first chapter, especially the fireworks part, you know, walking through the Shire at night under the stars, and then Gilder and the elves, all of that. I would say even like the entire Cottage of Lost play that we did, I thought that was great. Like, that whole thing just gives like the enchantment and the wonder. And yeah, I mean, we're gonna have so many more examples too, but it's like, this is where they share, and this guy's an influence on Tolkien is the deal.
Understood.
Joseph Pierce goes so far to say he would probably call Chesterton an honorary hobbit, because they both epitomize Englishness and everything, and like, he's so fun and whimsical. Like when Pippin's saying, "Oh, I want to have the best beer in the East Farthing," you know, Chesterton would have been right behind him. Like, he's like, "Yeah,
I would detour just for that.
Yeah, we got to get there. We got to have this." You know? Yeah, we'll return to him more. I think he'll probably be involved in a special that we do with one of his major books, I think, but we'll see. I don't really know yet. Still working it all out, but he's great, and I would highly recommend reading him. The two most famous books he has are Orthodoxy and Everlasting Man, and then he's got some fictional books with like the Father Brown thing that are all pretty famous too. So if you're ever looking for it, it's a worthy challenge to take up to read him.
Very cool.
All right, Clifford, you got a mic this time.
I've got a mic.
Where's this been the whole time you've been in San Francisco?
Hiding out in the basement. I did not know about it.
Yeah. Well, better late than never, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay. We got well, actually, how you been?
Been good. Let's see. Since last week, I'm still moving in. The weather out here in California is amazing.
Oh, yeah.
And things are going pretty well.
Nice.
How are you?
I'm good. It's late now, dude. This turned into such a long episode. Actually, not the episode you just heard, but the one we just recorded. Yeah. Let's read a review, and then we can get out of here. So this is 5 stars, obviously. or else we wouldn't read it. And
Of course.
this is from Voltron 2. The best review ever. Okay. Given Pat's identical Myers-Briggs profile to J.R.R. Tolkien, it is no surprise that he is able to offer such valuable insights into the author's writing. An all-around fun podcast that will keep even the most casual Tolkien fan intrigued. Oh, so this guy's got inside information. I also helped him pick out the name Voltron. This is true. You know, like those. You know, like the personality things, like the 4-letter one.
ENTJ or whatever.
Yeah, those things.
Okay.
Yeah. So I did it, and like the one that I did it on, it told you like other people that like have the same personality as you, and I got Tolkien, and I was
Nice.
like, oh yeah, this is
It's a sign.
Clearly this was accurate.
What is yours?
INFP.
Okay.
What's yours?
I can't remember.
I think you got to do my test. You got to go to my test because then you can see the famous people that have yours too.
Okay, fine.
All right, I'll send it to you. What did I look up? I just searched Myers-Briggs personality test, and that's like the first thing. It says like 16 personalities or something. That's the good one. That's the fun one.
Okay.
So yeah, everybody look it up. Let us know who you get, because there's a bunch of Lord of the Rings characters on there, which is fun. Frodo is my same personality too.
Nice.
I don't remember anybody else.
How do they do that for characters?
What?
How do they do it for characters?
I don't know.
It's
I feel like
little
for characters,
in my mind.
I feel like it's kind of easier to do it for characters. Like that's the mold. Like you just start with somebody that is that, you know, and then you build out from there. Yeah. Anything else? Instagram's still going good. That our survey for the hidden project that we will be doing. Clifford, you can rate the characters too. Come on.
Okay. Okay. Sorry, I'll catch up.
Yeah. Anything else that we got going on?
Not that I know of.
Yeah, we're in the middle of the. Oh well, yeah, we're in the swing of things here. Yeah, I guess we'll just keep chugging away.
Mm-hmm.
Thanksgiving's coming up. What are you doing?
Go back to Chicago.
Nice.
You?
Nice. For the whole week or just a couple days?
Kind of weird window for Wednesday to Saturday, I think, and then driving back to California with a van.
Nice. I'm staying here for Thanksgiving. So
Cool.
Nice and chill. Yeah. I think. Well, yeah, we can leave it there then.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Well, everybody have a good week then. Thanks for listening. Yeah. Have a good night.
Thanks, y'all.